I'm Linda Bloomfield. This is my studio in West London, and I'm going to show you how to make a glaze test. Glaze materials come as very fine powders, so it's really important to have a well-fitting respirator mask to stop the powders getting into your lungs. Also, goggles can help stop getting glaze into your eyes. Now I'm ready to make up my first glaze test. I'm going to make a glaze test with the Stoneware transparent glaze containing feldspar, quartz, whiting and china clay. This is my glaze notebook where I keep all my recipes written. To weigh out the dry materials, you need to get some scales. This is the triple beam balance, which is very accurate. You can also use digital scales, but they need to weigh down to 0.1 of a gram. When you're weighing out your dry powders, it's always best to weigh the china clay first. That will stop the other ingredients sinking to the bottom of the glaze. It will be much easier to mix up. So I'm going to add 70 millilitres of water to my glaze pot, and then I'm going to add the dry china clay to the water. And I need 10 grams of china clay, which I'm going to scoop out into a dry container and then add the dry powder to the water. This is better than adding water to dry powder, because that can cause the dry powder particles to disperse into the air, and these very fine particles can stay floating in the air for several hours after you've finished mixing the glaze, and you really don't want to be breathing those in. So I'm just going to try and get the right amount of china clay, and then once I've got 10 grams exactly, I'm going to start to add it to the water and then leave that to slake while I get on with weighing the next ingredient. So the next main ingredient is potash feldspar. Feldspar is the main flux used in stoneware glazes to help melt the silica at the temperature in the kiln. There are several types of feldspar. Potash feldspar is the most common one, and you can also get soda feldspar, which melts at a slightly lower temperature. This glaze needs 27 grams of feldspar, so it's quite a large amount. So I'm going to scoop out some feldspar. It doesn't matter if you put a little bit too much in, because you can always put some back again. That's the main reason for weighing out each ingredient separately rather than adding a little bit more to the pot as you go. So once I've weighed out the feldspar, I'll add that to the water and then leave that to slake. And then the next ingredient is silica. This is the most important part of the glaze, known as the glass former, as it makes the glaze glossy and shiny. Quartz is the main type of silica used in glazes. You can also use flint. They're interchangeable. Flint was originally used in the pottery industry because it was easier to grind up once it had been heated in the kiln. But nowadays we can get quartz very easily ground up by big machines in the industry, and they cost roughly the same, quartz and flint. So when you're weighing out the quartz, be very careful. It is sold damped down slightly with water to stop it being quite so fluffy, but it's still pure silica, so you really don't want to breathe it into your lungs or leave it floating around in the air. So then we add about 32 grams to our glaze. That's one of the main ingredients of the glaze, to make glossy transparent. So we add the quartz to the water, and then the next ingredient is another flux known as whiting. Whiting is calcium carbonate or chalk, and this is a secondary flux that is added to the primary flux, potassium in the feldspar, to help melt the glaze. So many stoneware glazes have a combination of feldspar and whiting. Those two fluxes together help the glaze melt better than just using one flux. So this glaze has 21 grams of whiting, and that's the final ingredient. This will make a transparent glaze. I can colour it with any number of colouring oxides, such as cobalt or copper oxide. But this glaze is just the base glaze before adding any colourants. So once I've weighed out the whiting, I can add that to our glaze pot and leave that to slake. And then once I've stirred it around a little bit, it will be ready to sieve. I usually sieve my glazes through an 80 mesh sieve. That means there's 80 holes per linear inch. This is the standard people use. You can use 60 mesh or 100 mesh. And once I've stirred it a little bit with a spatula, I like to sieve 3 times through the sieve. That makes sure it's all evenly mixed and all the powders are evenly distributed. You can use a spatula or a washing up brush. Some people have automatic sieves that sieve by just winding a handle, but I find the rubber spatula is my favourite. And I just keep pouring it back through the sieve 2 more times, just to make sure everything's evenly distributed. So the 3 main components of a glaze are the silica, which is the glass former, which makes the glaze glossy. Then fluxes to melt the silica at the temperature in the kiln, and those fluxes are usually potassium or sodium and calcium or magnesium. Then, as well as silica, we need something to suspend the glaze in the water and stop it sinking to the bottom, and to make the glaze stiff so it doesn't run off the pot, and that's the clay. So the clay is quite an important addition to the glaze. So this is the final time I'm sieving, and I've just scraped all the glaze into a pot, and now I'm going to dip a test tile into the pot. So I just dip it really quickly to get an even coating, and then wait for that coating to dry till it stops being shiny. And then I'm going to dip halfway again, so I get a double layer of glaze on the bottom half of the tile. And then I can just leave that to dry and sponge off any glaze from the back, because otherwise the test tile would stick to the kiln shelf. Once I've sponged all the glaze off the back of the tile, I'm then going to label the tile with a mixture of 50-50 iron oxide and manganese dioxide mixed with water and then brushed on, and the number on the back of the tile will correspond to the number that I wrote in my glaze book, so I'll be able to identify the tile once it's fired. You could also use an underglaze pencil to write the number on the back, or some people stamp their test tile with a stamp before they bisque fire it. So the test tiles are just made from a rectangle of clay, either rolled out as a slab or thrown on the wheel and cut up into slabs. And you can either have them horizontal on the kiln shelf, or you can prop them up on a kiln post just to see how much the glaze runs. And now I'm going to clean up all the glaze spills and powder. That's a really important part. Otherwise the powder will start to float around and get into your lungs. And then finally I'm going to label the glaze tub. You can just use a Sharpie felt tip pen to write a label on the lid. Some potters make a little test tile with a hole in the corner, and then they attach that to the glaze bucket, so you can always identify what glaze is inside the bucket. It's important to write the number both on the lid and on the side. And then this base glaze I can then later on come back and add colouring oxides to it, such as cobalt to make blue, copper to make green.